I almost walked into that wedding rehearsal dinner with a smile on my face and a card in my hand. I had spent $11,200 making sure my brother had the wedding he always said he deserved. I had the receipt for the venue deposit saved in my phone. I had my name on the catering contract. I had paid the florist in full because my brother said the florist didn't take payment plans. I almost showed up to that dinner wearing the dress I bought specifically for it, ready to sit at the family table and watch the man I had carried financially for 2 years finally start his life. Then my sister-in-law posted an Instagram story. It was a photo of the seating chart. White cardstock, calligraphy font, the kind of thing that costs more than my monthly grocery bill. I was not on it. Not moved to a different table. Not forgotten by accident. Just not there. And across the bottom of the story she had written, "So excited to celebrate with our people tomorrow," with a little heart emoji. And I stood in my kitchen, holding my phone, and I read it 3 times before I understood what I was looking at. Let me go back to the beginning, because you need to understand how I ended up here. You need to understand what kind of person lets this happen, and why it took a seating chart on someone's Instagram story to finally make her stop. My name is Nora. I am 31 years old. I have a decent job in healthcare administration. I share an apartment with a roommate to keep my costs down, and for most of my adult life, I have been the person in my family that problems get handed to. Not because I am the oldest, my brother is 3 years older than me. Not because I earn the most, my parents are both retired with pensions and a paid-off house. I became that person because I said yes the first time someone asked. And then I said yes again. And after enough yeses, nobody bothers asking anymore. They just assume. My brother got engaged 14 months before that Instagram story. Her name is not important. I will call her my sister-in-law because that is what she technically became, and I want to be accurate about facts even when the facts make me tired. She and my brother had been together for about 3 years when he proposed, and she came from what my mother always described in a lowered voice as a complicated family situation. Which I later understood to mean her parents had money, but were not willing to spend it on a wedding for a daughter they had a strained relationship with. My brother came from my family, which meant he also had access to money, specifically mine, because that is what my family had quietly decided over years of small decisions that nobody ever put into words. The engagement party was the first thing. My mother called me 2 weeks after the proposal and explained that it would be meaningful to have something at a nice venue, somewhere that felt special, and that she and my father were on a fixed income, and could I help out? I said yes. The engagement party cost me $1,800. I told myself it was a gift. I went. I smiled. I made a toast, and I drove home feeling good about being generous. 3 months later, my brother called. He needed help with the venue deposit for the wedding. The place they wanted required a non-refundable deposit of $4,000 to hold the date, and he was a little short. I asked how short. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "All of it." I said okay. I put $4,000 on my credit card, and I told myself I would be paid back, which I never was, and I think somewhere in the back of my mind I already knew I wouldn't be. I want to be honest with you about the next part, because I know what some of you are already thinking. You're thinking, why did you keep going? And I don't have a clean answer. What I have is the truth, which is that I loved my brother, and I wanted his life to go well, and I had been raised in a family where love was demonstrated through showing up financially when someone needed you. My parents did it for each other. They did it for my grandparents. I watched my mother spend her savings helping my grandmother move into assisted living without a single complaint. Sacrifice was how we said I love you in my family, and I had never once questioned whether the love was being given back in the same language. The catering contract came next. Then the florist. Then the bridesmaid dress alterations because my sister-in-law's maid of honor couldn't afford the seamstress. I wasn't even a bridesmaid. I was just the person who paid for things. By the time I sat down one evening about 6 weeks before the wedding and actually added everything up, I had spent $11,240. I had it written in a notes app. Venue deposit, engagement party, catering deposit, florist payment in full, centerpiece rentals, rehearsal dinner appetizers, a hotel block deposit because the venue required it and my brother's card was declined. $11,240. I looked at that number for a long time. I am not rich. I had savings, and I had been careful my whole adult life. and I had emptied a significant portion of what I had built carefully and slowly over years into a wedding I was apparently not important enough to have a seat at. I want to tell you about the seating chart again, because the first time I mentioned it, I was still processing the shock. Looking at it clearly now, there were 12 tables on that chart. My parents were at table 1. The family table, right next to the head table where my brother and his new wife would sit. My aunt and her husband were at table 1. My cousins were at table 2. I scrolled through the story slowly, zooming in on each table, looking for my name. I found everyone else I knew. I did not find myself. I put the phone down on my kitchen counter. I stood there. My roommate was watching television in the other room, and I could hear the faint sound of it, some baking competition show, and the sound of it felt very far away. I picked my phone back up, and I went to my text thread with my brother, and I scrolled up to read the last few weeks of messages. A lot of them were me confirming payments. The florist confirmed receipt. You're all set. The catering deposit cleared. I handled the hotel block. Here's the confirmation number. His responses were short. Thanks. Great. You're the best. I texted him. I kept it simple. I said, I saw the seating chart. I don't see my name. Can you help me understand? He read it immediately. I could see the read receipt, and he did not respond for 47 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. When he finally replied, he said, it's a small venue. We had to prioritize immediate family. You understand. I read that message several times. I have a name on the catering contract for this small venue. I wrote the check that is keeping the lights on at this small venue. My name is on the deposit receipt for this small venue. I thought about all of that, and I typed back. I'm your sister. How am I not immediate family? He said, it's not personal. We just had a lot of people to fit in. I put the phone down again. I walked to my window, and I looked out at the parking lot of my apartment complex, and I stood there for a while just breathing. I was not going to cry. I had cried over my family before, over smaller things, and it had never changed anything. What I was feeling now was something different than sadness. It was a very quiet, very clear feeling. The kind of feeling you get when you have been confused about something for a long time, and suddenly, it is not confusing anymore. I was not family. I was a resource. I called my mother. I want to be clear about why, not to complain, not to be talked out of anything, but because I needed to hear directly from her whether she knew about the seating arrangement. She answered on the second ring, which she always does for me because I think some part of her knows when she needs to be available. I told her what I had seen. I told her my name wasn't on the chart. I told her I had texted my brother and what he had said. My mother was quiet. Then she said, Nora, it's their wedding. They're allowed to organize it how they want. I said, Mom, I paid for most of it. She said, you offered to help. That's different from being owed a seat. I said, I didn't offer. I was asked. She said, I just don't want this to become a big thing. Can you please not make this a big thing? And that was the moment. Not the seating chart. Not my brother's text. My mother telling me not to make it a big thing after $11,000. After 14 months of being the silent financial engine behind a celebration, I was considered a guest at only as an afterthought, or apparently not even that. That was the moment the last piece of something clicked into place. I told my mother I would think about it. I hung up the phone. I sat down at my kitchen table, and I opened my notes app, and I looked at that number again. $11,240. Then I opened my banking app. The catering balance had a remaining payment of $3,200 due the week after the wedding. I had agreed to cover it. The florist had a final styling fee of $400 I had said I would pay day of. The hotel block had a final settlement coming through my card automatically. I did the math. There was still close to $4,000 of my money that had not yet been collected. I called the catering company. I explained that there had been a change in the payment arrangement and that they would need to contact the groom directly for the remaining balance. The woman on the phone was professional about it. She asked if I was removing my card from the account. I said yes. She said they would contact the couple. I said thank you. I hung up. I called the florist. Same conversation. The florist was less professional about it, she sighed audibly, and said this was very last minute, and I said I understood and I was sorry for the inconvenience, and I meant neither of those things. I removed my card. I called the hotel and asked them to move the block billing to a different contact. They said they would reach out to the name on the reservation, which was my brother. Then I sat back in my chair. I am not going to pretend I felt triumphant. I felt tired. I felt the specific exhaustion of someone who has been holding something very heavy for a long time and has finally, quietly, set it down. My hands were a little unsteady. I made myself a cup of tea. I didn't drink, and I sat in my kitchen while the baking competition played in the other room, and I thought about $11,000 and whether I had ever really expected to be treated like I mattered. I think I had. I think I had expected it the way you expect gravity, not because you've examined the evidence and made a rational conclusion, but because you can't imagine the alternative. Of course, the person who paid for your wedding is family. Of course, the person who shows up every time is included. Of course, love is returned. I had never stopped to question it because questioning it would have meant acknowledging that maybe it wasn't true, and I wasn't ready for that for a very long time. Now I was ready. My phone started ringing at 9:17 that evening. It was my brother. I let it ring. He called again. I let it ring again. Then a text came through. Nora, what did you do? The caterer just called me. What is going on? I did not respond. 40 minutes later, my sister-in-law called. I did not answer. Her text said, "This is insane. The wedding is in 6 days. You are being completely selfish, and I hope you know that." I read that text and I actually laughed. Not a mean laugh. Just the laugh of someone who has finally understood the punchline of a joke that has been told at their expense for a very long time. Selfish, the word that gets used for people who stop giving. My mother called at 10 o'clock. I answered because I always answer for my mother, even now, even after everything. She did not start gently. She said, "What are you doing? Do you know what kind of mess you've created?" I said, "I'm not sure I created it, Mom." She said, "They are scrambling. The caterer wants payment confirmed by tomorrow, or they'll release the date." I said, "Then they should pay it." She said, "Nora." I said, "Mom, why didn't you and Dad offer to pay for any of this?" Silence. I said, "You have a paid-off house. You have your pensions. You have savings. Your son is getting married, and you let his younger sister pay $11,000 of the bill. Why?" She said, "We contribute in other ways." I said, "What ways?" She didn't answer that. What she said instead was, "You're going to ruin everything." I want you to think about that sentence. I had funded the engagement party, the venue deposit, the catering, the florist, the hotel block, the bridesmaid alterations. I had done all of that quietly and without complaint for over a year. The moment I stopped, I was the one ruining everything. Not the seating chart that erased me. Not the 47-minute delay before my brother told me I wasn't immediate family. Not 14 months of being used without acknowledgement. Me, stopping, that was ruining everything. I told my mother I loved her, and I said goodnight. My father called at 11:43. I know the exact time because I was still awake, lying in bed with my phone on my chest, and when his name appeared on the screen, I felt something tighten in my chest. My father and I had always been closer than my mother and I. He was quiet where she was reactive. He thought before he spoke. I answered because I wanted to hear what he would say. He said, "Nora, I need you to hear me out." I said, "Okay." He said, "What you did today was wrong. I understand you're hurt. I understand you feel left out. But what you did pulling that support 6 days before the wedding, that is not what people do to family." I let the words sit there for a moment. Family. I said, "Dad, I wasn't on the seating chart." He said, "I know." I said, "You knew and you didn't say anything?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It wasn't my decision to make." I said, "But it was mine to fund." He said, "Nora." I said, "Dad, I need to ask you something honestly. And I need you to be honest back." I took a breath. "Did you and Mom ever plan to pay any of this back?" The silence that followed was the longest of the conversation. It was the kind of silence that is its own answer. He said, "We love you. You know we love you." That was not a no. It was also not a yes. It was the sentence a person says when they cannot look directly at the truth, and they cannot bring themselves to lie cleanly either. I had heard that sentence my whole life used to change the subject, and this time I didn't let it change the subject. I said, "Dad, I am not at the wedding. I am not on the seating chart. My brother told me I'm not immediate family, and I am not paying for a family I'm not part of." He said, "If you don't fix this, you will regret it for the rest of your life." I said, "I know which thing I'd regret more." He said, "That's very cold, Nora." I said, "Good night, Dad." I hung up. I set my phone on the nightstand. The apartment was quiet. My roommate had gone to bed and the television was off, and there was nothing but the sound of the street outside and my own breathing. I lay there and I thought about what my father had said. Cold. I had been the opposite of cold for 14 months. I had been the warmest person in the room, the one who wrote the check and made the call and solved the problem, and none of that had earned me a seat at the table I literally paid for. Cold was not pulling your support after being erased. Cold was writing so excited to celebrate with our people, while your name was on the catering contract. I want to tell you what happened in the days after, because a few things are important. The wedding happened. I know, because my mother sent me a single text the following Saturday afternoon that said, "It was beautiful. I wish you had been there." I read it twice and then I put my phone in my bag and I went for a walk. The weather was good that day, clear and a little cool. And I walked further than I meant to, and I ended up at a coffee shop I'd never been to before where I sat outside for a while and drank something with too much oat milk in it and watched people walk by. Nobody in that coffee shop knew anything about my family. Nobody there thought of me as a resource. I was just a woman sitting outside with a coffee, and I stayed there longer than I needed to because the anonymity of it felt like something I hadn't had in a long time. My sister-in-law texted me from the honeymoon. Not to apologize. To ask if I had kept the receipt for the centerpiece rentals because the venue was disputing a damage deposit and she needed documentation. I read the text and I did not respond. She sent a follow-up 2 days later. "This is really important, Nora." I still did not respond. A week after that, she sent a longer message explaining that I had created a difficult financial situation for them and that my behavior had been immature and that she hoped one day I would understand the damage I had done to my relationship with my brother and that she forgave me because she believed in keeping family together. I read the whole thing. I saved it to my screenshots folder. I did not reply. My brother reached out 6 weeks after the wedding. It was a longer message than I expected. He had clearly written it carefully, or had someone help him with it, because it didn't read like his usual texts. He said that he understood I was hurt and that maybe the seating situation had not been handled well, and that his wife had been under a lot of stress and made some choices in the final weeks that he didn't fully endorse, and that he missed me and hoped we could talk. There was nothing in the message that used the word sorry. There was no acknowledgement of the $11,000. There was no acknowledgement that when I asked him if I was immediate family, he had told me no. There was just the suggestion that something had not been handled well. Passive voice, no subject, nobody responsible. I sat with that message for 3 days before I replied. I did not reply with anger, because I was genuinely past anger by then. I wrote him a careful, honest note. I told him I loved him and that I wanted a relationship with him. I told him exactly what I had spent over 14 months, and that I had never expected to be repaid, but that I had expected to matter. I told him that being told I wasn't immediate family after being the primary financial contributor to the event was something I needed him to actually reckon with, not smooth over. I told him that when he was ready to have that conversation honestly, without the passive voice and without his wife drafting the language, I would be here. He read it and did not respond for 11 days. When he did, he said, "I hear you. I think we both need some time." I said, "Okay." And I meant it. I genuinely meant it. Because the thing I had discovered in those weeks, the thing that surprised me most about all of this was that I was fine. Not performing fine, not white-knuckling my way through fine, but actually fine. I had spent 14 months convinced that my place in my family was secured by what I gave, and when I stopped giving, I expected to fall. I expected the ground to disappear. What I found instead was that the ground had been there the whole time. My ground. The one I had built myself. that existed independent of whether or not my name was on a seating chart. I am not going to tell you that my family came around. I am not going to give you a tidy ending where my brother apologized properly, and my parents acknowledged their part in it, and my sister-in-law sent a handwritten note. That is not what happened, and I think you deserve the true ending more than the satisfying one. What I will tell you is this. About 4 months after the wedding, my mother called me on a Sunday afternoon the way she used to call me before all of this, just to talk, just to hear my voice. We talked for 45 minutes about ordinary things. Her garden, a show she was watching, something funny that happened at the pharmacy. She did not bring up the wedding. I did not bring up the money. We talked like two people who had decided that their relationship was worth more than the argument they were both still thinking about. Before she hung up, she said, "I should have told him to seat you at the family table." I said, "Yeah, Mom, you should have." She said, "I'm sorry I didn't." It was not a complete accounting. It was not everything I might have wanted from her. But it was real, and it was hers, and it was given without me asking for it. I held on to it. My father has not apologized. My brother and I have a relationship now that is careful and a little thin, like a bridge that was damaged and got repaired, but that everyone knows has a weight limit. I test it carefully, and I do not put everything on it at once. I think that might be what it is from now on, and some days that is okay, and some days it isn't. My sister-in-law and I are polite. We are holidays and birthdays polite, the kind of polite that exists because two people have decided it is better to be quiet than honest. I can live with that. What I cannot live with, what I learned I genuinely cannot survive, is being invisible to the people I have made sacrifices for. Not angry invisible, not dramatic invisible. Just not there. Not counted, not on the seating chart. I cannot pour myself into someone's life and then be told that what I gave was welcome, but who I am is inconvenient. I know some of you watching this have your own version of this story. Maybe it's a sibling like mine. Maybe it's different people entirely. And I know some of you are still in the middle of it, still saying yes, still writing the checks, still showing up at the tables you built, but not being offered a seat. I am not going to tell you what to do. I am not in your situation, and I don't know your particular heartbreak. What I will tell you is what I learned. Not from pulling my support, that part was just logistics, but from what came after. I learned that the people who love you do not panic when you have nothing left to give. The people who love you panic when you stop calling. Stop laughing. Stop being in the room. They miss you, not your wallet. And the people who only panic about the money, who text you from the honeymoon about a receipt, who call at midnight about a catering bill, who send long messages about the damage you've done without once saying the word sorry, those people are showing you exactly what you were to them. I was a resource. And then I stopped being one. And then I found out very clearly who in my family was capable of missing me instead. My mother called on a Sunday just to hear my voice. I am choosing to hold on to that. I was alone in my kitchen the night I looked at that seating chart. I put my phone down on the counter, and the apartment was quiet, and my roommate was watching television in the other room, and I stood there understanding something for the first time that should have been obvious for years. I was not hurt because I had been excluded from a wedding. I was hurt because I had spent 14 months believing that what I gave made me loved, and I had finally received proof that I had been confusing those two things all along. Being loved is not the same as being needed. I know that now. I walked to my window that night and I looked out at the parking lot and I stood there breathing, and after a while I went and made a cup of tea and I sat down at my kitchen table. And I started counting. Not what I had spent, not what I was owed. Just what was actually mine. It was more than I thought.